Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about overflow. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, as a software engineering team, how would you handle a situation where the assigned work habitually gets spilled into the next sprint? Remove the sprint. That's what I would do. So the reason why I say that is because I would like to tell people that the purpose of a sprint is usually not what you think it is, and very few people seem to understand the reasoning behind a lot of the processes that they are using. So the argument I will make to you is that the sprint as a measurement tool, because that is what it is, a sprint is just a way for you to measure how much can you do within a given time frame. That's it. Now, if you ask yourself this question, how does this sprint in of itself bring any value to the software development team? What is the benefit of you having a sprint? The work, as I like to say, the work is what the work is. All you're trying to do is that you make these estimates of the stories, and they're different sizes. You have, if you think of them as boxes, you have small stories, small boxes, big boxes, and you're playing a puzzle basically. You're trying to, hey, you have this sprint here, and now I'm going to fit all the boxes in here. So prioritize them and then make sure that because they're different size, I'm going to fit all of that in. It's like Tetris. You're trying to fit everything in, right, based on their size and shape. And then turns out that unforeseen things happen, because they always do, and your mold for your sprint breaks and some stuff flows over. What was lost in that entire transaction? Nothing. Unless there was someone who was measuring how many boxes did you fit into the sprint. And when somebody measured that, the next interesting question is, what does that matter? Really ask yourself that. Why did it matter how many boxes you fitted into one sprint? Because the problem with the measurement of this is that it actually has a cost. There is an overhead, and there's like performance anxieties. Like there's it actually has a mental effect on people. When you create a deadline, you create a mental state for people, and a sensation of failure for a lot of people if something flows over. And so unless someone is measuring this with the intent to evaluate how well your team is doing, or how, as I like to say, the main reason for the sprint is so that you can measure time-wise how many stores are you shipping and how fast, what is the pace of delivery, usually towards some end goal. Well, if you're not doing that, then this tool of measurement, it's sort of like you're gathering numbers for something that nobody cares about. And you will be surprised at how many software teams just run sprints because reasons. They're not actually ever looking at their burn down charts, or like using, they might look at it, but they're actually never making anything meaningful with the data that they are collecting, because that is what the sprint is there to do, to help you collect data on your performance. And so if you have habitual, I don't even know what that is. Do you mean that people are in a habit of spilling over? Well, then the question is, are they doing that intentionally, or is it because they are simply not able to accurately estimate the work? So the sprint might tell you that, well, you're not really good at estimations. Go figure, right? So how are you going to get better at the estimations? Make this, the classic one is to say, let's make the story smaller. Okay, so you're going to ship a bunch of CSS. How do you, for example, make a story about changing the color smaller? Are you going to merge, the color red, and then create a follow-up story to add the style on the page? You see, the problem with saying that you're just going to make everything smaller is that the unit of work can in some cases not be minified. It cannot be sliced down to something meaningful, because the reality is that at any given point in time, you have a set of requirements on you, desires from the business. They want to build something, make something, and you are not in control of what it is that they want to build. And in some cases, you find that a story can actually not be split down any further without actually causing a lot of other problems with overhead or complexity, or there are other drawbacks with trying to split it. So you sort of realize that this is the smallest unit that you can make. And then the next thing is going to happen, which is, yeah, you split down your story, but then you sort of, you just added more stuff. Instead of having big stories that were harder to like bigger boxes, you have smaller boxes. You still fill up the 2 weeks, because on paper you're supposed to be able to solve this in that amount of time. And that is the unpredictability. And then you're going to do the next thing that people do is that, well, historically we are not able to ship 5 features, so we're going to focus on shipping 3 features. Cool, now you do that. And then it turns out that, wow, actually we finished earlier, we actually finished faster because the tasks, they were actually easier, because you never know how hard something usually is going to be. You have an estimate. And so now you shipped early. Now your sprint is locked. So now you're going to have to pull in stuff to the sprint. How's that going to affect your calculation? And then you realize that if you didn't have the sprint, you would simply continue working because you finished early on the estimation. And now you can just pull in more stuff. And you start to realize that the only time it would have mattered if you spilled over into the next sprint was if there was a deadline at the end of that sprint, because then you're too late. And that is what a sprint is. It is simply a fictional deadline that has been created with the intent of measuring productivity. That's it. And so if you want to fix that problem, the reality is that you actually can't. I'm serious, you cannot fix this problem, because the only way you could possibly do it would have been if you knew exactly how all your stories are going to turn out, what type of stories you're going to be dealing with, what type of unforeseen things are going to happen. You cannot do that in a very chaotic, for example, in a very chaotic environment where a lot of things are ad hoc and like things are happening all the time. You don't know if the estimation that you have given is going to be correct, but you also don't know if some bug is going to come in or something unforeseen is going to happen in some way. I mean, unless you literally are just laying tarmac on the fucking road, it's very difficult for you to calculate exactly how fast things are going to go, or if something unforeseen is going to happen. And so you can, as I said, you can just say that we're just going to add less stuff to the sprint. But as I said, all that actually is happening is that you are being more conservative with your ambition to deliver things so that it will fit into the planning of the sprint. Because the sprint is all of a sudden the thing that is important, not shipping value. And then when you finish early, you're still going to have to pull in some stuff, or you're going to have to sit and wait it out. You're going to have to do nothing so that the sprint is going to fit. But if you do nothing, well, if you finish really, really early, you're going to have to sit on your ass, because you always run the risk. If you pick up the next thing just to fill up the sprint because you didn't really exactly hit the mark, well, what if that new story is unforeseen, in some way unforeseen? You pull in something into the sprint and now you overflow because that new thing took longer than you expected. So that is why I tell people, sprints and like flowing over is a silly notion. It's an imaginary thing that you have created, an imaginary deadline, and the only person who benefits whether or not you exactly meet the mark or if you flow over is the person who's going to do the damn Excel sheet that calculates your average velocity. And who the fuck cares about that idiot? So what I want you to take away from this is that if you have a habit of going over sprints, the only option you have is to reduce the amount of work that you put in the sprint. But you always run that risk where if you estimate too low, if you go conservative, you're going to have a lot of slack time to do nothing. And unless your company really cares about the sprint more than the stuff that you're shipping, you're gonna have to pull some stuff in or sit on your ass and do nothing, just so that the sprint chart looks nice. But the reality is that you're usually going to pull in some stuff, and then you still run the risk, because now you have less time and you don't know exactly how long something's going to take, because it's an estimate. And so now you might spill over on the new stuff that you pulled in. Congratulations, you just spilled over again. And all this mental excess that you're creating for yourself, and in many cases anxiety for people, is not productive usually, I argue. It's something that it's a cost that you pay so that someone can calculate a metric for you. And unless that metric is value building or very important in some way, I usually tell people, just fuck the sprint. It is irrelevant, because the work, as I said, the work is what the work is. If someone wants you to do something and it goes over the sprint and there's nothing else they want you to do, then this is not the problem. You are working on this thing, it's going as fast as it can possibly go. If it falls over to the next sprint, then if nobody cares, then clearly the sprint did not matter. But if they do care, well, maybe they'll notice that, yeah, this is actually taking longer. As I said, they're actually using the number, and then maybe you get staffed up or something like that. But you as the software developer, you should not feel bad over going over sprint estimates, because it is an imaginary number created to calculate your velocity. And if you are being treated poorly because you're doing that sort of thing, as I said, then just do less. It's super easy. You want to know how to always fit within the sprint? Do nothing. Achieve nothing, and then you will always be on time. Have a great day.